and I spend a lot of time with you guys. I'm okay with that.
Well, good morning, everyone. And I'll call to order our special council meeting for Wednesday, November the 4th. And as Councillor Regan was just saying, it looks as though like we were just together. My goodness. So don't know about you, but I had my own little watch party going on last night. So hopefully my eyes aren't too blurry as we work through our agenda this morning. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Okay, seeing none, we have one delegation with us, and I guess maybe I'll take this time to welcome Stuart, as well as welcoming Dirk Vanderwerf from the county. I think most of you have met Dirk before, and also joining us is Abby Heddle. I don't know if anybody's met Abby yet, but welcome, Abby. It's great to have you participate in one of our council meetings. So Stuart's really going to be the one who presents the municipal comprehensive review and everything that he's been working on the last little while. Before I hand it over to him, I might just preface everybody by saying this, I think, will be a very high level discussion at this point. He's obviously, Stuart's giving us an update on his work and where we're at with that. But we're not really at the position to be talking about specific properties. So I just might caution everybody when we're talking about, if we get to that point, just be mindful of maybe not using landowners' names, that sort of thing. We want to keep this as high level as possible. You can talk in generalities, and I think that will be better off for us. So Stuart, it's great to have you with us, and I'll hand it over to you this morning.
Okay, thank you very much, Your Worship. I'm pleased to be able to update council and staff as to where we're at with the project so far. So if I can share my screen, I'll maybe just pull up the presentation and go from there. I'm not sure if I'll be able to see anybody. So if there's any questions or comments, can somebody just let me know, because my screen will probably be just full of the of the slide presentation. So my plan this morning really is, and I'll just quickly,
maybe, but I'll just stop right there and just say, just for that sake, you know, I think we're all very respectful of everybody, but if you've got a question, just because we can't see everybody, just shout it out, and I think we'll be okay to run it that way.
Okay, that's fine. So basically, before I pull the slide presentation up, I just want to give you a sort of brief introduction and then go over an overview of the municipal comprehensive review and the work plan very briefly, because we've already sort of talked about that. The important thing is basically the preliminary data findings, which I'll go over, and then probably the most important thing is at the end of this is to have council have a discussion on sort of your thoughts on what we've come up with to date, and you know where we go from here. And I had a few questions at the end on the last few slides that I'd like to have a discussion with council. So I'll pull up the presentation now, and we'll get started. Okay, so just went over the presentation outline, and I'll start with the introduction. So I think most people know me, but anyway, I'm Stuart Finlater. I worked in municipal government for over 33 years, mostly in the planning, in the last few years as a CAO for Thames Centre. When I retired, I started up Finlater Associates Inc., a planning consulting firm, and the county offered me a contract for a year, basically, to work on sort of special projects for them, and this is the first one that I'm working on. So I appreciate the county's offer to me in that regard. So part of this project, some Middlesex County planners have been assisting with me. So Abby Heddle, who's on the Zoom meeting today, has helped me with data collection as far as population projections, housing, and those sort of things. So she's been very very helpful. And Alexandra Colesbury is a GIS technician, and she's been the one that's put together the mapping and material that you see in the presentation today. So I want to thank both of them obviously we've had discussions with Dan as well, and Dirk at the county. So it's been a pretty collaborative effort. So I want to thank everybody that's been involved so far. So a quick overview of the municipal comprehensive review. So the goal is to basically review and update the official plan that was last updated May of 2015 with regards essentially to population and projections, housing growth, and employment matters. It's not a complete official plan update with studies on natural heritage features and that sort of thing. It was more specific to growth and development issues. It's also to help ensure that the plan reflects current provincial policy related to growth. So as again, I think most members of council know, there was a new PPS that came out effective May of this year. So there were some changes made that we'll have a look at and make sure we try and keep your plan up to date in that regard. And again, the whole goal is to provide policy framework to guide growth in the township over the next 25 years. And again, just some background as to how that is to be done, right? So conform with the provincial policy statement, conform with the Middlesex County official plan, and address any emerging issues related to growth and housing, and also servicing constraints. I mean, there are some issues with wastewater capacity in certain villages or hamlets in Luke and Medolph, and there's an ongoing study as well, as council is aware, with BM Ross related to the wastewater treatment plant and the need, if any, to do an expansion to that, and that project is underway as well. So again, just summarizing, so we basically started in June of this year, met with senior staff, put together the work plan, and basically right now we're just wrapping up phase 2, which is the background analysis component. And again, I won't read all through these, but basically, we've looked at the land use designations in and around the settlement areas. We've looked at projected land, housing, and employment needs. We look at opportunities for growth and intensification and redevelopment within the existing settlement areas. And again, a brief look at the impact on the natural heritage features and the lands outside of the settlement areas, agricultural lands and aggregate operations and that sort of thing, to see if there's any constraints for expansion in certain areas. So in the end, what we'll have is a preliminary growth scenarios for use for our community engagement process or phase, which is the next phase we'll be going into shortly. And again, due to COVID-19, we have to look at alternative forms of engagement. I know, in a normal year, we'd be having open houses and public meetings in several different locations and several different times, and anybody who was interested would come to that event and express their opinion. We'd have maps, and unfortunately, given COVID-19 restrictions, we're not in a position to do that. So we're looking at an online virtual meeting of some kind, and again, I'm working with Ron and staff to sort of finalize that process, but we're going to try and do whatever we can to make it as open as we can for anybody who wishes to comment, contribute, take part in this process, that we will make sure that we do the best we can to make that happen. Phase 4 will be a draft municipal comprehensive report. A lot of the information you see in what will be presented today will form part of that report, and we'll have some recommendations for council related to any possible expansions to settlement areas, changes to the mapping, to the text in the official plan based on the outcome of the review. So we'll meet with senior staff when that's done to make sure that they're comfortable with it and we haven't missed anything, and then we'll be back to council shortly after that. The timing on all of these phases, again, just want to caution council that these are best guesstimates. Once we get into the public process, public engagement, there may be some delays, but these are the goals at this point in time. But they may be pushed back slightly once we get into the next phases of this project. It is anticipated that at the end of this, there will be there'll be an amendment to your official plan in some regard, whether it's mapping, as I said, or textual changes. But we will draft the official plan amendment, and that's another whole public process, a more formal process at that point in time. So anytime you do an amendment to your official plan, there has to be public notice, there has to be a public meeting, and anybody who wishes to speak at that time can do so. So in all likelihood, that will come in probably in January. I've got December to January, but it'll probably come in January we'll probably have that meeting in Lucan, probably virtually again, but in January. And once that's completed, that then goes to county council, and county council is the one that actually approves the amendment. So there's a bit of a timeline after that as well. So that's kind of where we're at, the process, and that's what we're shooting for. So where are we today? Well, as of this point, we've completed the review of all the building permit activities over the last 7 years. We've collected that data from 2013 through to the end of 2019. The next line there, completed review of the 25-year population and housing projections. So had quite a curveball, knuckleball, whatever you want to call it, thrown at us last week or so, when the County of Middlesex has retained a consultant to update the housing and population projections through the 2046, which is the 25-year time frame that the Act stipulates you can project out to. And they are quite different than at least the housing projections. The population projections are not quite so much off as what we had already collected. And that was Abby had collected that information through Stats Canada and other documents that the county had already had completed. So that has sort of thrown us for a bit of a loop. Dirk had a follow-up meeting with the consultant to sort of express the concerns that we had with their projections. But as professionals, I'm not gonna second guess what they come up with. They're experts in this field. They do it all over the province. It's just quite a bit different than what we were thinking was going to happen based on current activity in Lucan and Biddulph. And I should say, and I don't know if Dirk has any comment on this, but it's not just Lucan and Biddulph that I think will be surprised by the numbers. I think it'll be kind of across the board. That they're quite a bit lower than what one might expect given the current trends across the county. So I'll talk about that a little bit later when we get to that point. So and also having a look at the relevant vacant land parcels within the existing settlement areas, and trying to come up with infilling or intensification opportunities inside the current settlement areas. I'm also looking at the density analysis, so net developable area to determine how many units may be able to be supplied compared to how much is demanded. So that's basically a lands needs assessment. So the numbers that we've used in this report for land needs are based on 12.5 units per hectare, which is traditionally sort of where Lucan and Biddulph has been at. I think the more recent developments, and talking with Dan, are higher than that, maybe 15 or 18 units per hectare, which would then result in less demand for land. Obviously, the denser the development, the less land you need. But the numbers in this report are based on 12.5 units per hectare, which is about 5 units an acre. Okay. And we're also finalizing the discussion with staff, as I said earlier, to determine what the best input strategy for public input into the process will be. I'm sure you're all aware, you maybe heard from them yourselves, but there are a number of landowners, developers, whatever you want to call them, who have submitted requests for their lands to be included in the settlement area. And it's not a small number. I think the number of requests that have come in total over 500 acres. 226 hectares. It's basically basically almost all the land around the existing settlement area of Lucan. So it's quite a number, and obviously we're going to be nowhere near that. So that's why at this point it's not. I don't really want to get into landowners' names, things like that. But it is a substantial amount of land that developers and landowners are requesting to be included in this go around. And I'm sure council agrees that's just not going to happen. I think that would almost double the size of Lucan if we if we accepted all of those requests. And again, preparing for consultation with the provincial ministries and agencies, and working on the draft background report at this point as well for review with senior staff. Okay. So now we'll go through some of the actual statistics or stats that we've come up with. So again, this is historical population for Lucan Badolf starting in 2001 over here. It's about 4,200 people was the population. You can see it takes off and around 2011 and beyond up till 2016 where you're hit 4,700 people. So that's an increase of 500 people over that time frame. Is about 30, just over 30 people per year increase in the population up to 2016. The population by age cohort, and this is important. So the bottom lighter green color along here is people 19 years of age and under. And all I really want to show here is if you look at it, again, this is historical. So from 2001, the youngest age group had about 31% in Lucan Badolf, and it's down to 26% in 2016. And conversely, if you look at the top end here, the 55 to 75 year old people is gone from about 21% up to 30% over that time frame, and that trend is continuing, right? That's obviously, I think, again, council's aware, population is aging, and that has an effect on housing units and so on, obviously. So again, we'll talk about the projections up to 2046 in a few minutes. So the next slide, again, this includes the City of London. So these they're not broken out individually for the county or for Lucan Badolf, but again, it's just looking at it from 2021 timeframe. If you look at the percentage of older people in 2021, by 2046, the oldest age group, so those 75 and over, is almost doubled. It's gone from 8% in 2021 to 14% in 2046. So it just shows the aging population and the impact that may have on the housing units and services you need to provide and so on.
Stuart, I have a question.
Sure.
Sorry, thank you. So that slide there, if that encompasses all of Middlesex County, right?
And London, yeah.
And in London, I'm just wondering how reflective that is going to be of our community, because communities are unique with respect to stats. Mm-hmm. And when you think about our community and people who have moved here, say in the last 4 or 5 years. So when you're talking about those numbers, and we'll get to that later, but mm-hmm. I'm just wondering, and I gotta be honest with you, how accurate that sort of thing is because that's a general picture, but when they're coming up with the numbers for mm-hmm. each community, I'm just wondering if that's good data to be basing that, saying we can have 15 houses a year or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But I'm just wondering, I'm concerned about that.
Yeah, so that's a good question, Dave. Thank you. So subsequent to these population projections being completed, like as recently as last week, we've got the report from the consultants at the county. It's not even public yet. It hasn't gone to county council yet. I don't think it's going to go to county council until December meeting. So, but I can tell you, they've looked at Middlesex County as a whole, and they're working on local municipalities individually, but that's going to take some time for them to do the same process for each individual lower tier municipality. But I expect that we'll have that sometime in December. But the trends are the same. They're talking about the proportion of population in the 55 to 74 groups again, is going to be about 25% of the population in Middlesex County. And the percentage of older seniors is again going to rise from 7% in 2016 to 13% in 2046. So it's a similar trend, just looking at the county itself and excluding the City of London. And unfortunately, we don't have the breakdowns for each individual municipality yet. We were hoping to have those, a while ago, but everything being everything as it is today, it just it took a lot longer for us to get that information. And like I said, the county just got that information last week. So we will hope to provide a more detailed breakdown when we get that information.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay. So again, this is the Middlesex Census Division changing age cohorts, similar style graph as to the previous one. Again, this includes the City of London, and I think it just reflects the same thing with the other 2 or 3 slides that show is that we're going to have an aging population. Certainly the 50 and over age group is going to rise fairly substantially. And again, that has implications for housing. Okay, so this chart is the building permits issued by Lucan Badolf back to 2013. So these are building permits issued for housing, dwelling units. So you can see back in 2013, 14, 15, there was kind of a steady rise. I'm not sure what happened in 2016, but it dropped fairly substantially. And then 17, 18, 19, and I'm sure if we had 20 stats, would be the same, well up over 70 to 80 to 90 starts a year. And that's reflective of obviously the new subdivision activity within the village of Lucan. So if you averaged it out over those 7 years, Lucan Badolf's been averaging 60 new dwelling unit permits per year.
It's a single family?
Yes.
So an apartment, sorry if I can ask another question. So
yeah,
an apartment building with 30 units in, does that count as one unit? Or
no, those units are not calculated in this. This is just the single unit dwellings that permits have been issued for. There quite honestly hasn't been a lot until very recently of apartments or other types of developments. So those types of developments obviously are at a much higher density, and they don't really impact the land needs in any substantial way. They could be 30 to 40 to 50 units a hectare, obviously. So they're not critical in determining land needs. Yes, you might need a little bit more land, but it's more the single unit dwellings that result in the demand for the land.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this is kind of what you base your projections on. So if you're looking at 60 units a year and you're going out 25 years, it's not hard to say that's going to be about 1,300 new single unit dwellings if this average would continue. Again, you need to bear in mind a 25-year forecast. It's just that it's a forecast. I mean, anything can happen to change or alter that. If you have a recession, you have COVID, if you have other issues that come up from even on a global scale that can affect the local market. So it's tough to project out that far, but that's what the experts are for. But in our projections here, 1,300 units at 12.5 units a hectare, it's not hard to figure out how many additional acres or hectares of land you would need to accommodate that if that's the approach you take. And that's what we did. And then we had the new information come in, and it's kind of put that all up in the air. And again, I'll talk about that as we get a little further on here. Okay, so this chart shows, and it's hard to see, but it's fairly small, but the blue lines are the dwelling units that were built in Lucan each year. Okay, the next small little line is Granton. And then Clandeboye is the third line, and the bar in the fourth bar graph is the houses that were built out in the rural areas. So you can see almost all new residential permits since 2013 have essentially been in Lucan. Extremely limited in Granton and Clandeboye. So over that time frame, like the from 2013 to 2019. There's been 352 single unit permits issued in Lucan, 23 apartment units, and 11 condo units. Okay, so that's what's happened in Lucan. In Granton, over this period, there's only been 2 single unit dwelling permits issued. So over that 7-year period, two new dwelling units have been built in Granton. There's actually been 6 in Clandeboye, and then 20 outside in the rural area. So, you know, we'll talk about Granton later on, but clearly there's been minimal interest or minimal demand for any type of, you know, additional housing in that settlement area, and that becomes fairly important when we're looking at expansion to the Lucan settlement area if need be. Okay. Again, just going back to some population projections. So this is for Lucan Badolf. And again, this is going out until, this is the historical ones from 2001 to 2016. And again, the only thing that really, you know, is critical is if you look at from 2001, you know, the 70, you know, the 70 to over 80 year age groups, you add the numbers up. And again, it just shows the aging trend in Lucan Badolf from 2001 to 2016. And that's anticipated to continue through to 2046. Okay. So here is the, this is for Middlesex Census Division, includes the City of London again, right? So that's the question that Councillor Reagan asked earlier. You know, is it relevant? I think it is. I think it shows the same trend across Middlesex as you'll see in the City of London. So again, aging population is really what it shows. So the next few maps just show the 3 settlement areas essentially in Lucan Badolf. You're all well aware of them, obviously. Lucan settlement area, you can see the outline of where the existing boundary is now. You can see in here, this is where there's a substantial amount of land that's within the settlement area. There's now, and I'll show those shortly, but there's now, draft plans or plans to develop these lands. We've had some recent development down in this area, over in this area, and obviously up in the north end, but there's still a fair bit of vacant land within the existing settlement area of Lucan. Granton, similar situation. Current outline of the settlement area, large area here. I think it's about 19 hectares of vacant land, zoned and designated residential. There's some industrial land over here vacant. So there's a fair bit of land that's designated, not really being developed. Don't know if there's an interest from the individual who owns that land or not, but I think council needs to have a look at whether you pull back this boundary to mirror the existing to mirror the existing built out area. Maybe leave a little land there for future development, but this land here would be much better served, I think, being allocated towards the Lucan area where the services are there, the demand is there, the growth is there, as opposed to in Granton. I know it's historical, but I think you have to think about that and decide if that's something that as a council you're interested in doing. I think I said the last time I was talking, when we did our update in Thames Center a few years back, we did exactly that around basically all of our hamlet areas. We clawed it back to where the existing developed area was. That freed up a bunch of hectares that we could then apply to around Dorchester, Thorndale, and along the 401 for some development. So something to think about.
What did that process? How long was that process from start to finish at Thames Center? From the day it was talked about and implemented, finished.
Well, it was. Sorry, Councillor Manners. It was that was part of basically it was an official plan update, a 5-year review, and that process usually takes upwards of a year, like from start to finish. By the time you do what we're doing now, have the public meetings, have the municipality deal with the official plan amendment, and then get it off to the county. So yeah, it was probably a year and a half process from start to finish.
Of removing the lands is what I meant, like talking to the home landowners, confirming they don't want to develop it, removing it from them as future residential. That process was about a year.
Well, it was just part of the overall official plan process. So it wasn't a separate process. It was just part of, like, it's kind of like what we're doing here, right? We're looking at, is there a need to grow? Is there areas that, you know, you can adjust boundaries? And quite honestly, I don't believe that we actually contacted each individual landowner. We probably should have, but my recollection is, you know, the consultant that we hired made these recommendations. The maps were drawn up. We had our public input, you know, sessions. If people came and showed up and weren't happy about it, you know, they let us know. We didn't get any appeals on it. You know, a lot of the times these, you know, these are farmers that don't really want development. And for some, you know, at some point in time, the municipality drew the lines and they probably weren't even aware that their lands were in there. It wouldn't change necessarily their taxes. If it's being farmed, it would still be assessed at a farm rate. So
that makes sense. No, thank you.
It was a challenging process, but in the council, we're concerned about just what you brought up. Was there issues? Was there concerns? Was there appeals? In the end, there wasn't any, and we probably clawed back lands around like 6 or 7 settlement areas. So
maybe I can jump in a little bit at this point. Councillor Manders, those lands that we're talking about around Granton, those are sort of legacy designations. So prior to Lucan and Biddulph amalgamating, Granton was obviously the growth area as far as urban was for Biddulph. So those were held over since, you know, we're probably talking early 90s to probably even before that. So nothing has happened there for quite a while. And like I said, those are sort of what we call a legacy designation there. So I was glad to have Stuart, you know, sort of relay what happened in Tim Center when they did that. So he sort of outlined a process that we can, should council decide to go that route, we can have a look at that.
So if I can just confirm, since Stuart, you said you went through that process during your OP update. So we could include that in what we're going through now. It's not too late to kind of put that into the discussion.
No, it's not too late at all. I mean, it's part of the discussion, right? It should be a big part of the discussion, right? It is if these lands aren't going to be developed, and it doesn't look like there's too many landowners, it wouldn't be difficult to contact them in this case. I mean, in our case, we probably had 50 different landowners we're dealing with, but here, you know, it looks like that maybe one or two landowners, you know, they could be contacted directly if council wished and get their thoughts on it. Ultimately, it's council's decision. I mean, you can still claw it back, even though the person is not in favor of it. It's a political decision, and then if it's appealed, you have to defend your decision in front of the LPAT. But again, that's the decision the council needs to make at some point.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and so the last little summary you've got here is Clandeboye, and we're not proposing any changes necessarily to Clandeboye. There hasn't been a lot of development activity there. My understanding is there's no wastewater treatment facility or services there, so it's really almost like what Ron said, is sort of a legacy little hamlet area, and we're not going to deal with that any further in this review unless council directs otherwise. But I just wanted to show that as an existing settlement area. Okay. The other thing, and this is 3 different pictures here, just so you know, so there are different scales, but this just shows the industrial lands sort of north of Lucan, in Lucan. There's a couple of hectares in Granton, and then the lands along Elkinfield Road. I've had discussions with Ron and some staff about these lands. Although there's been some uptake in, you know, the Lucan Industrial Park, there's still a fair bit of land left there. And I think, you know, with Ron and myself when discussing it, Ron didn't think that there was a need or any desire in council to expand these areas. But again, if there is any concerns with that, you can let me know. I don't know if Ron wants to add anything to that or not, but so those are your industrial lands as we've been able to determine. So
yeah, if I could maybe jump in at this point. So we've finished phase 1 our industrial park project there at Fallon and Sainsbury. We still have about 20, I think Lisa's still on the call here. There's about 22 acres, I believe, that will form phase 2. So we're kind of in a holding pattern. I think the discussion around the council table was not to start any kind of servicing phase 2 until such time as phase 1 sort of crosses a certain threshold or build out to see what kind of revenue we're going to get out of phase 1, to see whether council needs that information before they make a decision on phase 2 servicing. So I think it's appropriate at this point to have a discussion or get some input from council as to what are your thoughts. Is council thinking about, do we need more industrial land to designate, or are we pretty good where we are right now? And again, recognizing that we're going to go through this process every 5 years. So
I think we should be. I mean, we're very fortunate to have 500 acres of people wanting to develop within our surrounding community. And if, depending on obviously on where this all goes and applied, if strategically we can apply, change, if staff deems necessary, change some of these areas and reapply industrial land where it is now, the legacy that'll probably never, if it's never going to be developed, and reapply it somewhere amongst those 500 acres where somebody may not want to or have the ability to build residential housing, but would offer something for our community for industrial buildings, storage sheds, whatever. I do think now is the time to do it. I mean, our demand that we haven't seen is probably because I don't think we've had that great of area till recently, till we finally got our industrial park going. Just a comment.
So what it's Peter Mastrakos. Can you give me some background on why the decision was made to look at the industrial land in Lucan rather than like right in town, rather than the Richmond Street and Elginfield corner, or just how that decision came about, just so I understand? Because that area in the corner there for me initially of Elginfield and Richmond looks like prime area for highway traffic, industrial buildings. But obviously I wasn't part of the discussion in the background, and not criticizing the discussion, just trying to get some background.
So if I can jump in at this point, Councillor, the area, Richmond and Elginfield area, again, that's a legacy holdover from the former Biddulph area, and you're exactly right. It's the transportation corridors that make that area attractive. The downside of that area is there's no water and there's no sanitary sewer in that location. So that a lot of industries don't want to look at it unless there is water, a minimum water. They can, sewer is a little easier to handle because typically you're looking at washroom facilities in a lot of cases only. So the sanitary is not as tough as water. And it's not only water for consumption, it's water for fire protection as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on from there. So the next few graphs are really, figures are what's taking place recently and what's happening currently. So figure 9 kind of just shows the areas where there's current development plans or activities on them, and ones that are sort of more built out, they're recently approved and are well underway, or in fact in some cases almost completed. So obviously this is in Lucan. So this chart here, figure, I call them charts, sorry, this figure here shows the actual number of lots or units that have been approved or are in the process of being approved for each of the developments. So the red areas are happening now or will be shortly. The orange colored areas are the vacant lands inside the settlement area that are currently designated and zoned for sort of residential use. So that's where you come up with it says 16 here. There's a small change. This little area here is actually residential. So it's actually 18.5 hectares of residentially designated lands inside the settlement area that have not yet been developed. If you add up the lots that are currently available inside Lucan, but inside the village of Lucan, it's about 270 lots, okay, that are available to be built on and not yet built on. And there's about 345 units. Again, some of these I've been told, although they're sort of in the works, may not go ahead, but 90 units here, 46 units here, 18 units. So those would be condos. These are apartments. 16 units here, sort of condos, 53 for apartments. Again, some of these are in flux, but this is the numbers that could be achieved on these sites. 78 units there for condo or townhouse type development. If you add all those up, there's about 345 units on top of the 270 single unit lots. So, you're up over 600 basically lots or units in Lucan Biddulph that have not yet been built on, plus the 18.5 hectares that there's nothing come forward on yet, but are available for infilling or intensification within the existing settlement area boundaries. So that's a substantial amount of development potential that you've got. And if you look at 60 units a year of what you're doing right now, that's quite a long supply of land within the existing settlement area. And that's the critical part of this whole issue is, do you need to expand the lands based on 25-year forecast? So if you use the numbers that we've come up with, 60 a year, you've pretty well got enough land inside Lucan right now. But the complicating issue now is the more detailed study from the consultants the county have retained substantially reduce the anticipated number of building lots or building permits to about half of what you're having right now. And so if you've got half the number of permits being issued per year, you've basically got half the amount of land needed, which makes it even more unlikely that there could be justification for expansions to the boundaries. So
Questions?
Sorry, go ahead.
Just units, is there any metrics to units to lots? I'm just like, okay, a unit typically would 2 units represent a lot, or am I even making sense? I'm just curious.
Well, like I said earlier, when you get into high density developments, so 12.5 units per hectare for single units. For higher density developments, it can be close to 20 to 30 units a hectare, depending on the type of development. If it's an apartment, that's probably applicable. If it's townhouse units, it's be slightly higher than 15. It might be 20 or whatever. But there's no set calculation, but it certainly is much more dense, obviously, so it takes less acreage.
Gotcha. All right, no, thanks.
Okay, so if there's no other questions on that, we'll move on to the next. And again, these blue areas here, there is areas that may, although they may be designated as a residential or for development purposes, they're restricted because of environmental features, setbacks from streams or creeks, that kind of thing. So that does actually eliminate some developable land, even though it's within the settlement areas. Okay.
Stuart, Peter Mastrakos, do you see anybody, have you seen the setting of like target density? So, as a community, I know the provincial policy is pretty wide, density, intensification, and to kind of look at the vision of where we're going, do you see that, hey, we've got lots of land, we don't have to go to 17 units per hectare, we can still stay at 12.5. Yeah, part of it is managing the intensification when maybe, and I may be incorrect, when the provincial standards are fairly wide and gives subjectivity.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. The density targets, and that's one of the questions at the end of the presentation. Actually, is it's really up to council as to how you would like to see development take place. I think the 12.5 per hectare was sort of more traditional development patterns in the past. Certainly, the newer subdivisions that have come on stream in the last year or so, or a couple of years in Lucan, are probably closer to 20 units per hectare. So it's really, I don't think, as you said, I don't think there's there's not an ideal density amount. It's really what you as a council are comfortable with, right? So if you like, what you see in the newer developments at the north end of Lucan, we can determine what that density level was. You're talking 178 lots at the sort of the east of Saintsbury line there, southeast of Saintsbury line. I'm pretty sure that's going to be higher than 15 units per hectare.
On the other side of that, Stuart, is there a target demographic that's kind of optimal for a community? We talk about the aging, and so have you seen communities say, hey, to have a well-functioning community and diversity, we'd like to have a target demographic of so many under the age of 25 and so forth, and then maybe have you seen targeting of housing to do that, to keep our demographics in? Is there an optimal demographic as such?
Well, again, I don't think I've ever seen a municipality that says we want to have 30% of our population 19 or under, or that kind of thing. People move to a community based on what it provides, and it varies from community to community, obviously. The other thing that I'm asking at the end of this presentation as well is, and I think it goes towards what you're asking here, is you don't have an allocation of types of housing in your official plan at this point in time. So what I mean by that is, do you want to have 70% single units, 20% medium density, and 10% high density? Do you want to have 80, 10, 10? That's a figure that you can put into your document and then try and enforce it, right? So again, that's on the last couple of slides here, is, do you want to go that route? And that's how you can try and control the type of houses that come in. So if you want, less apartment units, then it's 80, 10, 10, or, if you think there's a need for more apartments, the high density, 70, 20, 10 kind of thing. So it's up to you as elected officials how you'd like to see the municipality grow. Having said that, the developers are the ones that generally come in and determine what they think is going to sell in each particular community. And if it doesn't meet with your standards, in all likelihood, they're going to apply or seek amendments to it. But at least gives you something to go on if you have that in your document.
Okay, thank you, Stuart.
Okay, so moving on. So it's, when you're looking at expansions of any particular settlement area, you have to look at what constraints are there on the ground. So even though the south area might seem the best from a water perspective, for example, you can't develop it because there's a livestock barn or grain operation or something there. So what this chart shows in sort of summary is the planning constraints that are around the village of Lucan. So these larger ones are generally farming operations where you need generally 300-meter separation distance around livestock buildings or grain operations. Where there's creeks that go through, there's setbacks from top of bank. You've got your sewage lagoons here. There is required setbacks around those. For industrial uses, there's setbacks for noise requirements and things like that. So this chart and this information acknowledgements due was compiled by BM Ross a year or so ago when they were doing a sort of a high level review of constraints or opportunities. So this is basically picked from their report. And then there's environmental features like woodlots, significant woodlots, or ANSIs, areas of natural scientific importance. Map all those, and that then determines or gives some direction as to where you should not go or where it'd be more difficult to develop. And again, it doesn't mean you can't develop in these areas in some instances, but you may have to do mitigation or you may not be able to develop. So there's planning constraints, there's servicing constraints, there's natural heritage constraints. There's a number of constraints that we have to have a look at rather than just drawing a line around, the settlement area and say, this is where we're going to expand. Okay, so start off, this is the planning constraints. You can see, the top end here is pretty open, for development purposes. There's no planning, there's not a lot of planning constraints other than the woodlot that's there. So the next few slides are going to be transportation, water, and wastewater. And I think Jeff is going to talk about these in some regard. But the green areas basically mean there's good opportunity for growth. So a road network is either there or could be expanded there without any major concerns. For example, in here, there's a creek that runs through here, and they have to have bridge or crossing, so that area is sort of not deemed to be developable. And then when you get out into the further of the rural area, so each of these next three figures will sort of give you an idea of where there's good opportunity, some opportunity, and some constraints. So, Jeff, are you okay to talk about these next three slides?
Yeah, thank you, Stuart, and through the mayor. I'll just quickly, I'm assuming that everybody is basically here knows what we're looking at. So the transportation slide, obviously, there's not as much constraint in there due to we got good road system around the area. The only place I'd point out is in the southwest, if there's a question why that little red section's in there, we do have the old railroad tracks that go through there, and it would take some ability to get across that due to drainage and that sort of thing. So I would think that's showing up a little bit red there just because of the hindrance that would have to be to get out to William Street there. So, and the rest is fairly straightforward there. So I'll move next to the next slide, Stuart.
Yeah.
Unless anybody's got a question on the transportation. So sanitary, this is probably one of the more important slides when we deal with Lucan, because as everybody knows, at this point, we only have one gateway to the sewage plant, and that's the Chestnut pumping station in the center of Lucan. So right now, all sanitary flow flows through Lucan to that pumping station, then on to the wastewater treatment plant. So the only thing I would point out is that there is a green section again down in the southwest corner there. We do have an easement built in on William Street that can access that piece of property. So that's why it shows up green there. The other big thing would be the some opportunity, the yellow, is certainly not something that shouldn't be looked at. It just needs to be better engineered than the green. I wouldn't think that at any time to shy away from the yellow. It just means it's going to take a little more engineering and a little more work to get the sanitary into those positions there. Interesting, as again, I go back to the Chestnut pumping station. Everything flows through the Chestnut right now pumping station. And we don't know what the future is going to bring, whether we're going to continue using that as our focal point. But when you start to look at the south end of town, if we're going to bring everything up through town, we have to keep an eye on what that station does and how much volume's in that station. So that's where it ties into the master servicing plan that we're working on with BM Ross right now. This map here may get adjusted, or we may be able to have more, I should say we might have more information once that master servicing plan comes through, and we can better understand where or how Lucan looks with regards to the master servicing plan. So there'll be a lot more information come forward on the sanitary once that servicing plan comes through. So and then we'll just move to the water next. Lucan's got a good water system, obviously, to a point. And I think one of the things that will come through with the master servicing plan and the official plan, and when they're going to work together, is there's going to become a limit at which we reach our peak at the current water system. And that's what's going to really adjust the future. For instance, when the water tower reaches its constraint, will we have to add another water tower or another reservoir somewhere to feed expansion? But as you can see there, there's green sections around, and then there's the some opportunity sections, the yellow again. As we go into the red, it's more or less we just got to put more pipe in the ground. So the constraint is again cost and engineering there going forward. So, and then the next one, that's a combination. I would assume, Stuart, do you?
Yeah, I can chat. Unless there's any questions.
I don't know, maybe I should stop and see if anybody has any questions on transportation, water, or sanitary that has come to mind looking at those. The master servicing study is going to give us a lot more information on some of those, particularly the sanitary. So,
Jeff, I just have 2 questions. Just when are we thinking we're going to get that master servicing plan?
So I believe we're going to have a meeting with BM Ross later this month, and we're going to have an update on what's going on there. But it should be coming through basically at the same time in January as this one. Okay. For everything, but we're trying. They almost work as a glove, and it's right. It's an interesting thing. So,
and then just out of curiosity, because you did mention the water tower. I guess, do we have an idea of when there would be a constraint on that?
Well, I mean, obviously the master servicing plan's working on that.
Oh, okay.
We're going to get some hard numbers on that.
Okay.
But in discussions on with John and when the tower was built at the time, they always kicked around 6,000 population wise. So obviously, as we go through this next official plan, we're going to start to be approaching those numbers. So there's no constraint on the water tower now. We still got lots of great room there. It's certainly not something to worry about, but we can see it on the horizon.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so this slide basically is a summary of all of the previous 4 slides that we've talked there about water, sewage, transportation, planning constraints. And it just tries to show that there is potential for development around Lucan, but perhaps the best areas for development at this point from what we've come up with is the 2 green areas here are the least restrained and the most easily serviced. So again, that should give council some idea of I think where we'll end up going with this study when it's finalized. Okay. And finally, before I get into the sort of the summary here, is I just wanted to show again council Granton and the amount of land that they have that, as Ron said, maybe is a historical mapping of the area when it was part of Biddulph Township. So it has, again, you can see from the top left there, about 22.7 hectares of lands that are designated and zoned for residential purposes. And when we've had 2 permits in the last 7 years, I would suggest that that's probably an over designation, and that's not something that is going to change anytime soon. So again, that's a decision that council will have to make, but I would be suggesting you strongly look at adjusting that boundary to some regard, whether you leave some land across the frontage of the roads there for some infill or some additional sort of lots by severances, that might be appropriate. But I think for the most part, those are lands that are likely not going to be developed in my lifetime, and you could certainly use those lands somewhere else. So that was just a summary of the Granton situation. Okay, so basically at this point, this is kind of where we're at, and just kind of summarizing the work that we've done over the last few months. So as I said earlier, Lucan Biddulph has experienced relatively strong demand for residential development over the past 7 years, 60 or so permits a year, and almost all of that growth is taking place in the village of Lucan. Mostly single unit dwellings. There have been some recent multi-unit developments, including some low-rise apartments, whether they're constructed or in the process of being constructed. That's a fairly recent phenomenon. And the goal you've got in the official plan is to provide a range of housing types. But unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, well over 80% of the dwelling units are basically single unit dwellings. And that has traditionally been the case in most rural municipalities, right? There wasn't services in a lot of municipalities until recently, and therefore you weren't able to have apartments or, large townhouse type developments. So that's changed, and that's part of what's changing the growth in rural areas in Ontario. But as again, I've had a look at the recent report that the counties had from a consultant. They're saying that's likely to change too. Like the demand for single unit dwellings is likely going to change across the county gradually. And the information that they have in their report is that by 2046, close to 40% of the population will be over the age of 55, and that will result in a demand for a different type of housing, right? Seniors housing and that sort of thing. And that's where they see it going all across the province, including Middlesex County. So again, just looking at the preliminary data that the county has just received, and it wasn't really taken into consideration in regards to this report, because this report was basically finalized before that came in. But the draft population forecast for Lucan Badolf shows an increase from 4,700 people in 2016 up to a range of between 6,100 and 7,100 people in 2046. So they do a low and a high forecast, and in discussing it with Dirk from the county, I think they're going to look at that again and slightly adjust that as well. So again, these are preliminary, and just to give you an idea of what the projections are. So that's about, on the low end, about just over 200 people a year, and on a high end, about 236 additional people per year over the course of the study time frame. Again, as far as households go, and this is where we substantially differ. The preliminary information from the consultants is that there were 1,790 households in 2016 in Lucan Badolf, and they're projecting it to go up to between 2,370 and 2,700 households in 2046. So if you do that strictly based on single unit dwellings, that would be 19 on the low end to 30 on the high end of additional units per year. So you can see the sort of the quandary we're in, because right now you're averaging 60, and you're actually, these last few years, you're up at 70, 80, 90 a year. And their forecast is 19 on a low projection and 30 on a high projection, which really is way out of what we've got. So,
Stuart, do you want to advance the slide there? You're on the next slide there.
Okay, sorry.
Yep, no, it's good, thanks.
Talking away. So, so we've talked. I haven't, but I know Dirk has talked to the consultant and just saying those numbers don't seem to reflect recent development trends within the township. And as I said earlier, that it's the same across the board with Middlesex Center, Thames Center, Strathroy, Caradoc. I think the numbers that study puts forward is quite a bit lower than what they're experiencing. Now, as I said, I'm not being critical of them. They're experts. This is what they do. They're known across the province for their work. So it just really, we really need council to think about this and see how we want to proceed. Ultimately, that report is going to go to county council, and county council is ultimately going to adopt it, I would think, in one form or another. And once it's adopted by county council, I think that's the numbers that really the local municipalities are going to be basing their growth on. So it's a bit of a conundrum, but unfortunately, we're not going to get an answer for that probably until early in the new year, because as I said, I think that report, was just received. Dirk's got to review it and take a report to county council, and I don't think it's going to be there until December meeting. And then whether it gets approved or adopted at that meeting, or whether the county council wants further clarification, which may push it back even further, it just kind of throws a bit of a wrench into the projections for this study. But I don't particularly think a month or two is going to be a make or break to get this document updated. And you'd rather have correct information or the most recent information rather than rely on something that may not be as accurate as it could be. So so that's the issue we're in right now with this population and household projections. We really need to wait and see what the final document is, and then see how that impacts what we're doing here. Okay. I kind of went over the existing supply, which we went through on figure 10. So it results in, like I said, about 495 lots if you develop the 18.5 acres that are not yet developed and there's been no plans on it. You got 495 lots and about 345 condos or apartment units in total. You've got probably over 800 potential units within the existing settlement area of Lucan at this point in time without any expansion.
Stuart, sorry.
Yes.
I'm still trying to get my head around what to say. So the county adopts this number projection, and with what we have available currently, and as you've stated, they're experts, and you don't want to, I'd maybe disagree with you, question their numbers. If I'm thinking this right, if that's adopted and that's agreed upon with the county, then with the supply we have, we're an uphill battle, aren't we, with the province and or applying potentially more land or even a sewer expansion for that matter. I just don't understand, this is not good news to reality.
Yeah, I don't disagree, Councillor Manders. If those, and I don't know whether Dirk is still on the call, whether he wants to discuss this in any manner and how the process works at the county level, but yeah, I mean, if those numbers are sort of accepted, and then we're trying to do an expansion in any area of the county, not just Lucan Badolf, I think you're going to rely on those numbers, or the province via county is going to rely on those numbers. So if even on the high end, if it stays at 30 units a year, I think the projection was 900 units, and that was over a 30-year period because it went from 2016 to 2046. It's 30 a year, 25-year projection, you'd require about 750. We've got over 800. If those things are actually developed, right? So.
And the problem is our constituents, obviously, that we represent, that if this is adopted at the county from the experts that you said, as you stated, you don't want to question the experts, then there is going to be some real issues with spending money on expansion or even applying any land if this is adopted.
That you're absolutely correct. I think Ron wants to say something, but I don't disagree with you.
No, and if I could jump in at this point, it's, I guess, to try and look at the silver lining, the worst case scenario for us is if the county adopts the recommendations from the experts, and at the end of the day, the market is the market. The market's going to do what the market's going to do, regardless of what the report says for the county. And I guess 5-10 years from now, we're going to know who's right and who's wrong, whether the market's going to continue the way it's been going, or whether the consultant for the county is going to be correct in that the way the growth happens and the type of housing and that kind of thing changes over time. So we'll know that probably in maybe not 5 years, probably closer to 10 years, we'll know who's right and who's wrong on this. At the end of the day, I think the worst case scenario is here, the developers that have bought up all this land and are expecting the growth to continue, they may just have to wait a little bit longer to get those lands designated. If they're right and the growth continues, we may have to go through this process a little sooner than expected, but it's not, I guess it's not the end of the world. And I understand what you're saying, Mr. Deputy Mayor. It does have an impact on when we move forward on things like sewage treatment plant expansion, because if the experts are correct, you're not going to want to pull the trigger on spending $7 million on a sewage treatment plant expansion if it's or the expansion is going to look different than what we sort of foresee right now, and put it that way.
But those are those are, oh, sorry, Dave, you go ahead. Sorry.
No, and I was just going to say, if it is adopted, I'm not too worried about developers that have speculated buying land at all, actually, just so you know, at all. I'm more worried about our constituents and us who we represent on spending money that if we adopt this, even at 19 to 30 at the high end, if the county adopts that, I think it is going to be a waiting game to your point, Ron, on who's right or wrong, because I mean, what's in front of us and the building units in front of us and lots, I mean, we, if we're in no rush for the, if that is correct, but I am surprised at it, that's all. So,
Yeah.
My concern lies in the messaging that this, what kind of message does this send to the development industry? Is that going to scare a few of them off from moving forward? I don't know. Like all the commentary we get now from the developers is their concern is we're not going to have enough land and we're going to have a hiccup in the system. So we're not going to be able to continue the flow of building the way we are if we don't sort of designate more lands. That's their concern, is that there's going to be a gap. And I think, to Stuart's point, he's crunched the numbers there. There's quite a, if council decides to swap out some of the development or the residentially designated lands that are unused around Granton and move that to Lucan, there's quite a supply. So this is a problem that's, a ways in the future for sure.
I have a question.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Dan.
My concern on this is that it's an expensive waiting game. It could be an expensive waiting game. And to the deputy mayor's point, concern for how money is being spent. When you think about the last time that we went through any sort of OP review, it wasn't to this high level. And now, if this is adopted at the county level, and let's say, in 4 years, we realize the data that we're looking at today is wrong, we have to go through this again. That's an extremely expensive, and frankly, it's very irresponsible. And as a ratepayer, I would be extremely offended to have to go through this again. I just, it baffles me. It really does. My question would be on the reliability of data. When you look at, and maybe Ron, you can speak to the history of this. So the last time projections like this were made for our community, like how true to timing were they?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I'll use an example. The development at the very north end of Lucan on the west side of Saintsbury, that was 100 acre. That was originally a 100 acre farm. And when we went through this process the last time, we tried to get that entire 100 acres designated residential.
Just when was that? When was that process for that particular piece of property?
For that piece of property, it was probably, Dirk, you've been around for a while too. I think it was 2000.
You can put me on the spot to remember the numbers. I don't remember the date.
2005, something like that was, I think, the last major time. But we didn't have the history of development to be able to justify that, and the ministry simply wouldn't allow us to designate that much additional land for residential. But that was in 2005, and it took a while for things to get going. A former mayor sort of floated the idea of the development charge holiday, and that was the spark that really started the whole process moving. And it's taken a while to get some traction, but we seem to have a lot of traction now and a lot of interest from various developers. So we don't want that momentum, I guess, to slow down or stop.
I have a question, if I could.
Yeah, I was just gonna, just before, if I can just finish my train of thought, if you don't mind, Councillor. I understand a lot of this discussion to the report is going to happen at county council. But, you know, I liken it to the road work. You know, we talk about the road work that we wanted to do at Saintsbury and 4, and how, you know, or let's take the Frank Street project. You know, you're going to, even though you've got it mapped at 2 different projects mapped at different years, for consistency, you're going to do it together because that's the responsible thing to do. And I look at this, and Ron, you touched on like how this could affect, and so did the deputy mayor, the expansion at the wastewater treatment plant. And if again you do it piecemeal to reflect this data or what we're going through, then again we're going to have to go through it, you know, in X amount of years. And how responsible is that to the one ratepayer? I just don't understand. And maybe those answers will become clearer when the consultant presents to, or I don't know whether the consultant is presenting to county council or whether Dirk is presenting on their behalf. Certainly when that happens, I would probably encourage our council to watch that meeting for sure. Yeah, it's baffling. And I guess anyways.
I was just going to say, I think from the information that Stuart has presented to council today, I think collectively we can breathe a sigh of relief that we're not with our backs up against the wall and have no land for growth. We do have growth that can be accommodated, you know, quite reasonably over the next 5 years without any real issues. So that's the good part of this. And at the end of the day, really it's a crystal ball exercise is really what it is. And to your point, Madam Mayor, you know, it's council's I guess responsibility to try and make the best decision with the best information they can have at the time.
I mean, the reality is there are options on the table for us, and they may be difficult options for us to make, but there are options on the table. That's for sure. And to the deputy mayor point, I mean, right now we can say we're extremely fortunate to have people and developers that are extremely interested in our community, and they have made business decisions for themselves. We can't, you know, get involved in that. They've done it for whatever reason. I do believe, and we've had that conversation about wanting to keep growth going and not having it stall and have to pick up. You know, I do believe that there will always be people out there that will always look for opportunity. So to that point, I'm not as concerned to, you know, throw the towel in that this is going to deter opportunity.
And Madam Mayor, I know it's Dirk speaking. I just wondered if the council would indulge me for a couple of minutes, if I could just give a little bit of background on the population numbers, if that's all right.
Sure.
Yeah, it is a complicated issue, and you know, I think Ron and I have been, and Stuart have been around long enough that, you know, we used to basically do projections every 10 years, and that was good enough. You know, we're at this, I really think we're at this inflection point for, well, not only Lucan Biddulph, but Middlesex County overall, that, you know, there is a change in the amount of growth that's happening right across the county. And so we last looked at the projections in 2018. We did those in-house, and county council did endorse those. Earlier this year, just knowing that there's, you know, you just have to drive around the county to see the amount of change that's occurring, we did in-house redo the projections again. And you know, part of that is just because it seems now that some of the census data, it doesn't reflect what we see, you know, what's happening in our communities. I look at the last 2 censuses. I think the last one, Strathroy-Caradoc, showed a slight population decline. And the one before that, Stuart will correct me if I'm wrong, it might be vice versa, Thames Centre had a population decline. Mm-hmm. And we absolutely know that. I just don't believe that, you know, having been in the communities. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time to try to come up with numbers that we think reflect what we have here, what is actually going on. But I'll be honest, you know, we've done the projections in-house, and Abby and I worked on that, but we have a kind of a limited expertise in that, right? We can't do the full cohort analysis, the headship rate stuff that that these private firms that do your development charges, et cetera, they have an expertise there. So we wanted to bring them on board. And we had to do it a bit in parallel because we didn't want to work at, getting these numbers done. And at the same time, Lucan, Biddulph, Strathroy, Caradoc, and Middlesex Center are all doing official plan work. And so, we're trying to make this, the things come together. So we have some draft numbers. They're continuing to do some sensitivity analysis. And it's been great, I think, to be honest, that we've, been able to take a look at the draft numbers with Stuart and with Ron and kind of say, well, this is what we're seeing happen. And have you looked at this and have you looked at that? So, but certainly the goal of, at least my goal and my recommendation to County Council ultimately for Council's consideration is not to constrain municipalities in growth. In the Greater Toronto, the GG, whatever the expression is there, the province allocates numbers for municipalities at the county and local level and regional level. The way that the County of Middlesex's official plan is structured, it's not that way. It is intended to be, a higher level document, and through local official plan processes and local official plan amendments, the amount of growth within each municipality is established. So a bit of a long-worded answer to say that, we don't have finalized numbers yet, but it's certainly not the intention. It wouldn't be my recommendation to constrain. The intent isn't to constrain a particular municipality that is experiencing growth when we know that, that is occurring. But it is difficult when, you talk to the population projections folks, to look back, to project forward 25 years on the last 2 or 3 years, they'll tell you isn't statistically sound. So it is a balance there. We have to have numbers that are defendable and logical, but also trying to reflect what we believe is happening. And of course, Lucan Biddulph is, the topic today, but we see similar things happening elsewhere in the county. So I am mindful of that, but it isn't easy, Madam Mayor.
Great, thanks, Dirk. Councillor Regan, I think you had a question.
I did. Maybe more of a comment, but I'm just, my concern is that it's gone from, and if correct me if I'm wrong, it's gone from like 60 to between 19 and 30. And we've had considerable growth. We've had a spike in growth. And I guess, and again, this is my first time through the process, which is not an excuse, but it's, if we're doing an official plan and I'm looking at these numbers and we're thinking about where we want to go, I don't know how reliable those numbers are. And I just need to be clear. These aren't the final numbers. This is being reviewed, and this 19 to 30, because if you're making decisions, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but if we're making decisions on those numbers, the 19 to 30 or the population numbers that we have, if we're making decisions on that, should we be making decisions based on those numbers, or should we be waiting? And I guess looking for some clarification, or if I'm offside here. So like I said, I'm not comfortable going forward making decisions on numbers that may not be reliable, because I'm shocked by that, quite frankly. So, and I'm thinking there's something wrong with the calculation. Yes or no, or I don't know who can answer that, or if it's even a question. Sorry.
Well, I'll take a shot at it, but I mean, I agree with you completely, Councillor Reagan. It does make a huge difference. And as Dirk said, they're basing their numbers on a lot more detailed information than what permits Lucan Biddulph has issued for the past 7 years. They're suggesting that you can't rely on that there's this headship rate and cohort levels and in-migration and out-migration, and some houses are knocked down and not rebuilt. And, there's all kinds of things that they look into it as experts in this area. And, it's a difficult one. And I agree with you as a member of council. What numbers are you going to rely on, and how do you proceed forward with it? So, and as Dirk just indicated, they are looking at it again, but I would be very surprised if it came up anywhere close to 60 per year, which is what you've been averaging for the last 7 years. And as Dirk says, that if you're projecting out 25 years, they like to go back 25 years. It was a 25-year average before this. My comment on that is, and I just stated it earlier, you can't compare, 1980 Lucan Badolf growth rate to 2019 Lucan Badolf growth rate.
No.
I don't know when you first got a sewage treatment plant in the village, but I mean, based on my own experience in Thames Center and before that in West Missouri, you know, we didn't have services, we didn't have any growth. Well, then we get a sewage treatment plant and a new water storage tower, and it just takes off, and it's completely different than what the historical growth rate has been. And I think that's part of what we're seeing across the county is gut services in a lot of these smaller places now. We never had growth before. There seems to be a bit of a trend where people moving from urban centers out to the, you know, rural areas that are still close to these large urban centers. And so I think it's changed the dynamic of growth and where growth takes place and how quick it takes place. And I think that has to be factored in somehow. So
and if I may, Madam Mayor?
Yep.
So I know we all want to be very responsible when we're making decisions about the official plan and moving things forward. So what I'm wondering is that if there is a review of the numbers and the new numbers come out, whatever they happen to be, is there an opportunity to have the methodology explained? Because, you know, we're thinking about, you know, the next 5 or 10 or 15 years in the community. And again, and I can't remember who said it, but I mean, I want it to be a very responsible decision. So I mean, I want to feel comfortable with that. And is that opportunity going to present itself where they'll say, yeah, it's going to be 30 or it's going to be 26 or whatever the number is. And well, we have that opportunity to say, this is how we got to that number. Because like right now, I'm not comfortable with it, to be honest with you.
So a couple things, I was going to call you Dr. Reagan, Councillor Reagan, before, because I know that all of our senior staff and consultants online will have a better answer than me, but I just wanted to remind you, we're not making any decisions today. This is a really high level discussion, and it's a lot for information to digest. And I think Dirk can probably speak to it, but that question about defending the data would happen at the county level, since it's the county level. It's the county that has got worth the consultant. So that's where that discussion would happen, and then it would filter down to us.
Okay,
as far as I think.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Madam Mayor, could I make a comment? As this meeting has gone on, I just wonder whether it wouldn't be the smart move to sort of hit the pause button on our process, because so much of it hinges on the results of what the county ultimately approves in regards to the population growth projections. So I don't know, maybe we should have some discussion around the table about, is it smart? Because we're talking about going to the public, but how do you go to the public when you know, Stewart's initial numbers are at 60 lots per year, and the high estimate right now from the county's consultant is 30, and then that makes a big difference. So I guess I would look for some comments from council, and maybe even Dirk and Stewart. Like, what do you think?
It's Peter. I have a question. Can we front end load our numbers? You know, can we say our growth of these number of homes is going to happen in the first 5 to 10 years? And then we can deal with the official plan 10 years from now, because we're demographically, if you look at longer studies, they're saying the global population by 2100 is going to stop growing. You know, the G7 nations are stand out for their low birth rates and aging population. So specifically countries like ours are going to have potentially demographic issues. But are we able to front load our projections to say, hey, yeah, we're going to do that many homes, but we're going to do it in the next 10 years. And it may fall off to 10 units per year after that. I'm not sure, but at that point, I'm not sure. They're just thoughts. Can we front end load this? Or?
So maybe in that same vein, maybe should we be speeding it up to get through this and get it before a county council has an opportunity to approve whatever the new numbers are? Dirk, I guess that's a question for you.
Well, I'll start with the first question if I could. That is the projections. They do see, like, the projections are quite accurate over large populations, like countrywide, provinces even. they become less and less accurate when we get to small areas. And it's, I think it's fairly intuitive that, most of the growth I believe that most of the growth that's occurring in Lucan right now, for instance, it's not just people that are, born and move out of a home in Lucan. They're people coming to the community from elsewhere, from all over the place. And we've seen that in Middlesex County, people coming out of the Toronto area and out of London. And so it's hard to capture those in projections, to be frank, and it's hard on small populations to capture those. The second part of that is, I believe that even the consultant, the preliminary numbers we've seen, they do see, I don't know how you'd express it, sort of a curve to growth. They see that over the next 10, 15 years, there's going to be, continued strong growth. But just as our society ages, there is going to be an inherent slowdown of growth unless, broader immigration and migration policies change. So there is a limit, just because of the very large percentages that Stuart already talked about of people that are over 45, and as they continue to age, there is a limit as to how much growth they believe will occur. And then, sorry, Ron, you were asking about sort of timing. It's always tough. In an ideal world, you'd have, like a massive servicing study would be done 2 years ago, and then population projections, and then official plan amendments. The reality tends to be that we have to do these things sort of in concert. And sometimes it's imperfect information that we have, and maybe the mass servicing study has to reflect the OP and vice versa, for instance. But I don't think we're that far off on timing over the next couple of months to sort of try our very best to make all of this work, if that was a question.
I guess my concern is when we go to the public and we have the the Zoom meetings with the individuals, and it's going to be developers, it's going to be other landowners. What do we tell them at this point? Because we really you've got two vastly different options. If the county's consultant is correct, and that's what the county approves, we're limited to even the upper estimate of 30. To Stuart's point, the numbers don't warrant any additional lands being designated for residential growth, even if we swap some of the lands from Granton and reallocate it to Lucan area. So I guess I'm struggling with, what do we tell people in a face-to-face Zoom meeting?
Yeah, and if I can, I agree with Ron. I think until those numbers are sorted out and agreed upon, I think it's premature to go to the public, because it can make a huge difference. As Dirk says, if these numbers go to county council in December and they approve them or adopt them, whatever term you want to use, then that's the numbers we need to go with. And I think at that point we'd be good to go to the public and say, here's what we've got. This is the past experience, but this is what's being projected based on the consultant's opinion, and therefore this is what needs to happen. And rather than going out now with, I don't know what I'd say to people. I really don't have any, until this document's even public. I mean, it's really tough to discuss potential growth.
And in that vein, Madam Mayor, we talk about being responsible with the ratepayers' money. I just wonder whether we're on a treadmill here and we're not going anywhere. So I don't know that it's a good use of Stuart's time and ultimately the taxpayers' dollar to keep moving forward when that's such a big part of that's a big piece of the puzzle here. That's an unknown that's going to be decided by county council first. So yeah, that's kind of where my head's at.
Stuart, have you presented to other communities? 'Cause obviously, this is going to be a similar issue across Middlesex County, and I expect other regions outside of Middlesex County are going to have the same concerns, because there's been a lot of growth in the last few years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't seen, I've got the report, but I haven't talked to any other municipalities. I think Dirk may have had some discussions with them, or might be thinking of doing it. But yeah, Lucan Badolf is not alone in the numbers that they're presenting here. Okay, they seem to be low across the board compared to what we would anticipate based on our knowledge of what's taken place in our own municipalities. But it's the same across the board. And it'll be an interesting discussion at county council, I'm sure, with all the municipalities.
I kind of agree with like, if again, it's pretty amazing if the directions are adopted at that, even the middle of 5, we are sitting good with what's presented to us right now for 20 years, 25 years. It is interesting. And then we adopt after that, or we have to obviously go make changes as time passes on those projections. My thing is, does this make sense? Are we able to have staff start the process, and does it have to be applied to land at this time? Can they remove, if we want to, that land in the grant and settlement there, and have it in the cloud, so that when planning and we need to apply it appropriately and where it's determined by, I believe, through county and staff, then it's sitting there. So can we start that process? Because I do feel, that'll be easier for us to react and at least have that done. Or does it need to be applied and attached when I'm removed?
I don't think you could leave it in the cloud, so to speak. I think
Okay.
what the province and through the county is looking for here is generally that there's no net increase in settlement area boundaries. So you can swap it around if you want, but you can't have a net increase. So if you take it away and don't apply it to Lucan area in some regard, I think it's gone, and then you got to justify getting it back again. So I defer to Dirk on that for his opinion on it. But I think if you're going to do that, you do it at once. You take it away and you apply it.
You apply it. Okay, thanks.
Through the mayor, I would just add that, yeah, Stuart's right. Typically, it would be we call shuffling, moving the cards around. So down designation one area and an addition somewhere else. And I think, frankly, that's part of the planning analysis that has to occur. Is if council was to take the direction that Granton is to be a portion of Granton is to be down designated and it's to be added to Lucan, it's part of the analysis is because Lucan has servicing and those other things that go along with it. So it's sort of, you need to look at both sides of the ledger. So typically that is done all at one time as part of one official plan amendment.
Dirk, Peter Masterakos, not to put you on the spot, but what would do you have any options or thoughts for us to go forward on this? How we should move forward given the statistics?
Well, through the mayor, that Stuart and I have been, and Ron and I have been talking a lot about this, of course, in the last couple of weeks, and trying to move forward with the numbers. So, I understand that you might want to look at your public meetings in January or what we're looking at on that, which we're not far off. As crazy as that sounds, almost, we're into November now, and December is a difficult time to do public meetings, for instance. Probably my recommendation to council at this point would be to give us a couple of weeks to keep looking at these numbers and try to come up with something that we think is appropriate. And then we can get back to you through Ron with what a time schedule might look like and when public meetings would look like based on your schedule, et cetera. As Stuart has already mentioned, he wants to, I think we're going to try open houses, if you want to call it that, where you can schedule, a person could ideally schedule a bit of one-on-one time with Stuart and ask those questions that you normally would have, maybe done in the community center previously, looking at a map board. So that stuff takes a little bit of time. So that would probably be my recommendation, would be to give staff, your preliminary comments today, which you've already done a lot of, and then we'll get back to you in a couple of weeks with what we think is an appropriate timing. We're working with Ron, of course.
Okay, thank you, Dirk.
Where am I? Okay, so I guess what's our next step? Jeff?
I have a couple of comments just to throw, just to make sure I got a couple of things on the servicing. So the expansion at the plant is going to go forward on these. If the numbers are reduced, they're still going to go forward. This what we're talking about today really does not change anything to do with the expansion on the sewer plant. We need it. or else even with these lower numbers, we're not going to develop that land. So just so everybody's aware that expansion at the wastewater plant is still going to go ahead, and we need it to keep going as we're going along. So I just want to make sure that was said. Secondly, what this is going to do, if depending on where this ends up going, it's going to put even more pressure on the master servicing plan to find out where in the village of Lucan do we need to put extra servicing in the ground. So there's going to be a little more pressure on the master servicing plan if this is just harder to plan out further. And the final comment I just wanted to say is the next couple of years, developments are really going to go, or we can see a real push on the next couple of years. And my comment there would be, do we really want to go to our green spots and develop the easy stuff first, or should we be pushing some of the constraints or some of the yellow spots now when we know when there's a real push, and hold back in our back pocket some of the green spots that we can because if we're going to have to compete, let's be honest, we're going to compete with London, Middlesex Center, Thames Center. If we're going to try and pull other people into Lucan, maybe it's something in our back pocket that we keep some of those green spots available for easier development down the road. So just a comment, I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. I'm just saying that when we go to look at these numbers and see what the future is, that might be something to look at.
So Jeff, one quick comment on proceeding with the development of the sewer expansion. That, obviously staff will update us because that'll substantially affect, obviously, the development charges for those remaining units that if that we have to proceed, because that'll have which is fine but that'll have a severe impact on the last half of that build out.
Correct. So, and I think Ron and I just had this discussion, I think late last week, that there's a real pressure on reviewing the DCs, and even looking at building up Saintsbury and some of these other spots that we have in the DC accounts. We've got to reopen this and making sure that we're collecting money properly to pay for these projects that we've got to get done now. So Ron and I we had that conversation last week that there's a real pressure there. And then having said that too, I want to make sure everybody, the expansion that we're looking at, it's done in stages. So we're not doubling the size of the plant. We're looking at bringing about a third on. So as we grow, we can keep adding stages to the plant. So this expansion will be designed for about 1,000 homes. And if you look at the numbers that will come back, we'll know almost immediately when the next expansion will have to kick in. So we'll be able to tell how we pay for this expansion coming, and we'll have an idea of when the next expansion is going to have to kick in. So I think to the deputy mayor's point, I think we can lay out the expansion fairly well once all these numbers come back in. But I just wanted to make sure everybody's aware that the expansion will have to take place.
And the development charges will be staged accordingly to pay for that.
Exactly.
Thank you.
All right, next steps. I don't know, Stuart, did you?
Yeah, so, sorry, so just on this chart that's up there right now, I've just noticed that, and it may be moot point because of what we just discussed, but the additional lands should say 50 hectares, not 70. If you take the 18, the 22 off the 90, just to clarify. So that again, it may be moot point until we figure out what we're going to do with the county numbers. So, so basically the only, there's a few questions I've got here for council. Again, we work together. We might as well discuss them, whether we're going to delay the next steps or not. But as I said earlier, there's no stipulation in your official plan right now for what types of homes you'd be looking for. Other municipalities like Strathroy, Caradoc, and that are considering, like 80-10-10 for singles, medium and high density, 70, 20, 10, like that's generally where they're going. And I just wonder if council is interested, or at this point, or whether you want to wait and see. But I think a 70, 20, 10 split is probably reasonable for a municipality like Luke and Biddulph. And again, there would just be a policy we'd put into the document to say that's your target. That's what you're targeting. You want 10% of the new development to be apartment type developments, if that's what you want. 20% medium, which is your townhouses, condos, that kind of thing. And low density is obviously your single units, your duplexes, and semi-detached houses. So I wonder if is there any interest in council in talking about that today, or do you want to hold off until down the road a little bit?
One question, Stuart. Can you then break the 70, 20, 10 down? Do you usually go through that process? Say out of that 70%, we're targeting 40% single family. Do you set targets around that? Do you go deeper that way?
You can. But like the medium would be like semi-detached, multi-unit, maximum 6 units, townhouses, and linked kind of dwellings. So that would be your medium range. So if anything, that's what you'd be shooting for in the medium density. The high density would be your apartments, townhouse complexes, and things like that. I don't know if you want to break it down any more detail than that. It just gets complicated and hard to administer, really.
Know if anybody had any more comment. I guess I would think, just from what you've said, we don't have that in our plan now, and it does seem appropriate to have a goal in there or a target. And
sorry, Madam Mayor, sorry for me.
I'm not an expert. I would look to you to kind of guide us through what that might look like, but I wouldn't have an issue with having a target in the OP. I guess from there, would it be appropriate, and maybe you don't have a percentage, or is it a statement to make a statement about something around around affordable housing, that there is a desire of the community to have a more affordable option?
Yeah, and that's really what this target would do, right? Because if you're looking for medium and high density housing, that tends to be the lower priced housing. And so right now you don't have anything. And as I said, it looks like statistically you're probably upwards of 80 to 85% single unit dwellings for the most part. Until recently, it's changing recently. If you put these targets in there, then you're looking for, basically 30% affordable housing. If you look at the medium and high density, which generally is much more affordable than single unit dwellings, right? So it does it, but it also doesn't hurt to have comments in your plan to that regard as well, and that can easily be accomplished. Okay. So
sorry, Councillor Regan, did you have something you wanted to add?
I did. I was just saying, I absolutely, we need to have something in there. We don't have anything in there now. And the comment about affordable housing, absolutely. But I'm just wondering with those numbers, 70, 20, 10, and again, I apologize if it's not a good question, but those numbers and that can be amended as we move forward. I mean, we may feel that there's a need that we may have to have a higher than 20% medium density, or maybe higher than 10%. Is that something that can be changed as we're going, like during that like the amendment process? I don't know if that's the right term, but we might find, if we put this statement in that we, 70, 20, 10, we find out 2 years from now that we might, that we need to change those numbers. We can do that, right? It's like I'm assuming it's sort of a dynamic document, and we can.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's a target, right? It's not, it's not going to be strictly enforced, but it's a target, right? And you just, as each development proposal comes in, you'd have a look at it and say, what, you've got no multi-units, or you've got no this, and we'd like you to try and accommodate it by doing this. And you have discussions with the developers, but it's certainly not cast in stone once you put it in there. You can amend your document at any time. It's a bit of a process, but you could amend it and if it's not accomplishing what you want it to accomplish.
And the reason I'm saying that, Madam Mayor, is I'm just thinking the times that we live in and how quickly things change and how, statistics and those sorts of things are, changing our minds and our processes and that sort of thing. That's sort of just why I was asking that. So just to keep up with times and to make sure that we're serving the needs. And again, nobody expected we'd be in a pandemic. If you asked about last year, we didn't know about it. So it sort of changed things. So who knows hopefully it's better, but who knows what's going to happen next year's sort of thing, or the year after. Okay, thank you.
So if council's okay with that, then I'll sorry, go ahead.
Is it the wording? Is it the density and the percentage of density, or is it the wording of an all-inclusive, area?
I'm not sure I understand.
Like an all-inclusive area that would encompass affordable housing or density and all-inclusive. You ever heard that term or no? I've seen that used before. I just didn't know if that's part of it or not.
Well, if you put a density target in there, which is this 70, 20, 10, it would apply municipal wide, right? So it wouldn't just be for Lucan, but that's generally where most of the development is taking place anyways, right? So that's how you can control the type of housing. And then the density, you can have a density target again in your plan, which I don't think there's one in your plan now. I think DM Ross indicated in their study that that's the target in the official plan, but I couldn't find that target anywhere. That's how you can, again, affect the size of lots and how dense you want that development to be. I can tell you in the new Strathroy Caradoc plan, they're looking at densities of 15 units a hectare for their low density, and 37 units a hectare for their medium density, and 74 units a hectare for their high density. So you can see the difference there. So right now we're looking at 12.5 units per hectare, basically. But
with us, sorry, changing. I understand now what you're saying there on that. What about the opposite, I guess, of what the province is trying to, with high density? I think Lucan, maybe you can correct me, is in a unique situation with up to 500 acres of people willing to work with our community and have growth. Is that an area where we're not maybe talking about enough, or looking at it and having estate lots or an estate subdivision, or not the density, with us having 500 acres potentially available to ourselves?
Well, again, you can have different lot sizes depending on what type of zoning you've got. Like usually there's a minimum lot size, there's not usually a maximum. But I can tell you the developers, for the most part, are going to want as small lots as possible to get as much money back as possible from their investments, right? So yeah, they may have some larger lots in each subdivision, but it's generally not good planning to have large estate lots just because of efficiencies and
land use, yeah. No, I agree. It's just I'm thinking that if we take again the data we've got and we don't need to apply any new land because we're sitting good for 25 years as we are right now, there might be developers say, you know what, I'd love to put up 10 houses on 10 acres. I'm being maybe sarcastic on that, but I know what you're saying. It's just, it's just an interesting thing that our community has, that we have that much land that people would like to develop, I think. So yeah, no, okay, just a comment. Thank you.
Yep.
One other question, is the provincial policy kind of flowing against what the projections are from county? They're basically saying we're not going to have a lot of growth, and provincial policy is saying increase intensification. And so it's interesting that in some ways that these are kind of going against each other to an extent. You're only going to have 10 to 30 houses a year, but intensify.
Yeah, and I think again, a lot of those intensification policies come from what's happening around the GTA and large urban centers, where they want to expand out for single unit dwellings. And where's the best farmland in Ontario? In southern Ontario, right? So those policies are intended to try and protect farmland by making you go denser and up instead of low density and out. And you're right, it's the same principles apply to even around Lucan. So the province doesn't want you taking any farmland out around Lucan unless you have to. And if you have to, by the way, we don't want 3-acre lots or 2-acre lots. We want it to be intensified. So that's the thinking behind the provincial policy. So I don't think it flies in the face. It's just a different way of looking at it, really. Okay. So again, I think this is things that we can think of, and I can come back the next time I come before council and maybe provide some calculated density units. We'll look at other municipalities, what they're doing, and we'll discuss with your staff what they think is appropriate for Lucan. And that may change, but if you put that up higher, obviously, again, that reduces the amount of land you need and sort of flies in the face of kind of think what you're thinking you want to do here. The last point there, I think we've talked about that as well. The public engagement process. We're gonna have to do it virtually in some form or another, and I'll work with Ron and Lisa, and we'll come up with something on that. And I guess the question is, as Ron indicated earlier, are we going to hold off on that until January? I think that's a good approach, but it's up to council if you agree with that.
Okay, yes, I would look for comments on that from council.
I would go by Dirk's example of waiting to see if we get more detail on the data in the next couple of weeks. Otherwise, we may want to postpone unless that accelerates. If we get information in 2 weeks that gives us guidance, then we can move from there.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
We all are anxious to get this going, but I mean, we want to do it right. And the reality is, I don't know whether it was Stuart or Dirk said, I mean, if we have to put it off, like January really isn't that far away. So I think we need to be responsible about this and just not try to push something through for the sake of it.
Right. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if that's the case, your worship, then I think I can work with Dirk and Ron over the next few weeks and see where that population and household projections go, and then we'll either come back on a Zoom call like this, or we can provide a memo to Ron to bring to council, and we'll update you as to where we're going. But it's been fun. It's been a challenge, and I hope when we get to the end, council's satisfied with what we've put together.
No, certainly. Ron, did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to echo what Stuart just said there. I think it's the right thing to do is to hold off a little bit until we get a clearer picture of what we're dealing with, because otherwise you're kind of floundering around not knowing which direction to go to. So I think that's the right decision on council's part to hold off for the time being. And like Stuart said, we can either have a rescheduled Zoom meeting like this, a special meeting, or if depending on what the information is, we could also be a delegation to council at a future meeting.
Yeah. Do we need anything formal to do? Should we accept the report for information?
I would suggest that's appropriate, yes.
Okay. So I guess
Make
I would
a motion.
entertain a motion from Councillor Regan to accept the report as presented for information.
Yes.
Okay.
Motion to accept, yeah.
And a seconder for that one?
I can, Dave, Deputy Mayor Dave Miller.
Yep, Deputy Mayor.
Kathy, there was a couple of edits before we accept, subject to the 2 edits that Stuart mentioned about the data.
Yeah, okay, yeah, good point. Yeah, good point, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Pat. As, I guess, presented and amended. Thanks for that. Any further discussion on that? All opposed? Just scrolling through everybody's pictures. Okay, that's great. Thank you. And I just wanted to thank Stuart and Dirk and Abby and Ron and everybody, Jeff, that's worked on this. It's fascinating. We may not be happy with some of the information that has potentially going to be presented, but it is fascinating, and it's I think it's great for our community to see and be part of. So thank you for that, and we'll look forward to updates in the next steps. And I guess with that, I would ask for a motion to adjourn so that we can all get back to the business of our personal days. Councillor Westman and Councillor Regan. All opposed? And that's carried.